In the turbulent 1960s, some war films didn't just tell stories. They told truths too dangerous for their time. Governments frowned, studios panicked, and reels vanished into storage. These were the films that challenged the official narrative, exposing hypocrisy, moral rot, and the price of survival. Tonight, we unearth 13 forgotten battlefields Hollywood tried to bury. 1. Play Dirty, 1969. Picture the Libyan desert shimmering like a mirage, all glare and grit. Michael Caine's Captain Douglas isn't introduced as a standard-issue hero, but as a company man, an oil expert dragooned into sabotage because war needs winners for headlines. His commando team isn't noble, they're mercenaries and misfits. The mission: blow a German fuel depot and then disappear so a more photogenic unit can claim the glory. From the first dune crest, the film tells you the uncomfortable truth. Image matters more than lives when propaganda is on the line. What made Play Dirty so combustible wasn't just its violence, but its worldview: sardonic, unsentimental, and allergic to patriotic speeches. Men steal water, shoot prisoners, haggle over loyalty. Honor is sand that won't stick. Director André de Toth frames ambushes as dust devil verdicts. When the depot finally erupts, the sky looks painted with gasoline. It's dazzling and damning at the same time. Censorship didn't always mean scissors. Sometimes it meant the slow suffocation of a release. The film's acid cynicism hit nerves during a decade already boiling with doubt. Publicists pulled back, matinees evaporated, and the movie slipped under the holiday barrage of safer epics. Critics who embraced its clarity were easy to ignore. Those who called it too bitter became useful cover. Yet that final freeze frame lands like a court-martial, against brass, against myth, against the idea that neat endings belong to honest wars. Cultural impact arrived later in the way Play Dirty gave permission for modern combat films to question not just tactics, but motives. Its quiet indictment of PR masquerading as valor felt like a breach then. Now it feels prophetic. 2. The Americanization of Emily, 1964, blackout London, champagne, ration books, and a marketplace where anything can be traded if you know whom to ask. Enter Charlie Madison, a Navy officer who'd rather secure luxuries than charge a beach. He's glib, charming, deflationary, a walking refusal to die on cue. Emily Barham, a war widow with grief behind her eyes, isn't charmed easily. Their romance becomes a debate. Is it braver to live honestly as a coward than to march willingly into a staged martyrdom? The Scandal was satire. This film flips the heroic template and shakes out the theater dust. Command decides the first American killed on D-Day should be a sailor, purely for optics, and Charlie is drafted as a symbol. Cameras are poised, speeches are pre-written. The film calls that kind of honor what it is: advertising. For some, especially in an industry that depended on recruitment-friendly stories, this was intolerable. The censorship pressure arrived as marketing cold shoulders and release hesitations. Studio strategists worried that audiences and sponsors would recoil from the film's deromanticized tone. Its rollout was trimmed, its conversation muted. But Emily's legacy is long. It helped carve a cinematic lane where irreverence could be conscience, not cowardice, and where laughing at the machinery of glorification counted as an act of courage. In a decade tilting toward protest, the movie's cultural impact lay in its permission to doubt. It argued that living and telling the truth can be braver than dying for a headline. 3. Hell in the Pacific, 1968. Two men on a reef. No speeches, no battalions, just Lee Marvin's downed American pilot and Toshiro Mifune's stranded Japanese captain circling each other like wounded predators. The island is a trap of tide and coral, the war feels far away, and yet inside every gesture. They draw borders in the sand, erase them for water, redraw them for pride. The film moves like a tide chart of human nature. Hostility ebbs, survival flows, understanding flickers. Then the current reverses. Director John Boorman shot chronologically, letting sunburn and exhaustion strip away the character's armor. The result is disorientingly intimate. When they discover a bomb-blackened cache, the conflict off-screen crashes back in. The ending is a cloud of ambiguity. No medals, no catharsis. Just the unsettling sense that winning and losing are words that crumble under real weather. Why did this rile the gatekeepers? Because it refuses the comfort of absolutes. A story that humanizes both men during a hot century of proxy wars was always going to draw nervous glances. The film met a different kind of censorship, trims, downgraded promotion, a strategic burying beneath noisier titles with clearer heroes. Yet its cultural footprint deepened over time. You can feel its fingerprints on survival dramas and two-hander war stories that followed. Works that argue the real battlefield is the space between two people who might have been friends, if not for uniforms. Hell in the Pacific insists that empathy is dangerous to propaganda, which is exactly why it was treated like contraband, powerful, small, and capable of changing the current. 4. The Victors, 1963. From Italy's liberated streets to the snows of a war-torn Europe, The Victors plays like a collage of triumph poisoned by the cost of living through it. Carl Foreman's episodic anti-epic drifts through foxholes, dance halls, and sudden graves, pausing to watch joy curdle into cynicism. There's no single hero, just soldiers drifting from battle to battle, each vignette ending in a moral collapse rather than victory. What made it combustible wasn't the combat. It was the unblinking gaze at what soldiers carry home. One sequence, a Christmas. Crucifixion of a deserter, shocked even seasoned filmgoers. Another, showing interracial love during a decade still dragging its feet toward equality, challenged both audiences and censors. Columbia executives hacked at the film, slicing the most controversial moments, then released it in the cinematic dead zone of the holiday season, buried under safer fare. The official line was that the movie was too long, but insiders knew it was too pointed. In an era teetering on the edge of the Vietnam quagmire, the last thing studios wanted was a war film that implied victory could be another form of defeat. The muted release meant its cultural impact went underground, carried by critics and veterans who saw in it a mirror that refused to flatter. Today, its fragmented structure feels eerily modern, like a dossier of evidence against the illusion of clean wars. 5. The Bridge at Remigan, 1969. Snow, mud, and desperation hang over the bridge at Remigan. The Rhine's last intact crossing becomes the war's final artery, and both sides are willing to bleed for it. George Siegel's American lieutenant doesn't beam with patriotic fire. He's counting the cost in coffins. On the other side, Robert Vaughan's cultured German colonel obeys senseless orders even as his conscience rots. The production itself collided with history. Shot in Czechoslovakia, filming was halted when Warsaw Pact forces invaded during the Prague Spring. The cast and crew fled like the refugees they were portraying, blurring the line between drama and reality. United Artists, worried about political backlash, all but abandoned marketing. The premiere arrived in the shadow of lighter summer musicals, its gravity ignored. Censorship here wasn't scissors, it was invisibility. Executives avoided anything that might inflame Cold War tensions. Yet its legacy endures because it refuses war's easy categories. There are no victors, only survivors, and even they walk away diminished. For those who found it in its quiet afterlife, The Bridge at Remigan became a reminder that sometimes the real battle is to keep telling the story after the world stops listening. 6. Moruri, 1965. A freighter drifts through wartime waters, its steel belly carrying more than cargo, it carries choices. Marlon Brando plays a German pacifist blackmailed into spying on his own people, a man whose survival depends on betraying one side without giving his soul to the other. Across the deck stands Yul Brynner's captain, a man of duty weathered into exhaustion. Their duel is fought not with guns, but with glances and half-truths in the ship's narrow corridors. Moruri had the rare courage to suggest that all sides in a war might be morally compromised. Hollywood, already uneasy, saw early test audiences recoil from Brando's portrayal of a reluctant operative. The film's anti-war undercurrent, its refusal to crown a pure hero, made it a hard sell during Vietnam's early years. Studios slashed its promotion, screenings vanished. Critics who did see it praised its claustrophobic tension and moral complexity, but the wider public barely knew it existed. Over time, its influence crept in quietly, seen in later thrillers where victory means little more than surviving one more night. Moruri was a grenade of a film, one the system diffused by quietly lowering it into the sea. But the charge is still there, humming beneath the surface, waiting for audiences willing to dive deep enough to touch it. 7. The Thin Red Line, 1964. Before Terrence Malick turned the title into a sweeping meditation in the 1990s, The Thin Red Line was a stark black-and-white descent into Guadalcanal's humid hell. Andrew Martin's version strips the war of fanfare, no brass bands, just cicadas, monsoon rain, and the snap of rifle fire echoing through dripping jungle. Soldiers trudge forward not toward glory, but toward the next ambush, the next body. The film's refusal to glamorize combat made it an uncomfortable proposition for Allied artists. This wasn't the Pacific of triumphant headlines, it was a vision of exhaustion and moral erosion. Dialogue cut like a bayonet, a sergeant calls his men spare parts, while close-ups linger on eyes that seem to have forgotten home. Composer Leonard Rosenman abandoned rousing marches for unnerving silence, punctuated by machetes hacking through both vines and fear. Its most radical act was showing Japanese and American troops in parallel states of terror and fatigue, undercutting any notion of moral superiority. That humanization alarmed distributors who feared backlash from veterans groups and patriotic organizations. Marketing was minimal, release limited to a handful of theaters. Yet among those who saw it, the impact was lasting. The Thin Red Line dared to present war as a slow bleed, where every hill gained is paid for insanity. In an age when studios preferred their Pacific tales wrapped in heroism, this film felt like contraband, a smuggled truth with the power to change how a viewer thought about victory. 8. Hell to Eternity, 1960. From the Arizona deserts to the black sands of Iwo Jima, Hell to Eternity tells the true story of Ira Hayes, the Native American Marine who helped raise the flag immortalized at Iwo, but returned to a country unwilling to honor him. Phil Carlson's direction refuses to look away from the racism Hayes endured before facing enemy fire, making it as much an indictment of homefront hypocrisy as a battlefield drama. Tony Curtis plays Hayes with a haunted restraint, flanked by Guy Stockwell's venomous bigotry and Vic Damone's gentle farewell. It's a war movie that turns its rifle around, pointing at America's own prejudice rather than the enemy across the sea. That inversion rattled the safe narrative of the post-war era. The discomfort was deliberate, and it drew a quiet backlash. Studio marketers starved the film of exposure, letting flag-waving epics drown it out. The fear wasn't box office failure. It was the idea that audiences might question what kind of country sends a man to fight for freedoms he's denied at home. For years, Hell to Eternity existed in a twilight of late-night TV and collector circles. Today, it reads like a warning ignored that a nation can win a war and still fail its heroes. In showing Hayes's victory as bittersweet, it exposed the gap between propaganda and truth, and that gap was what censors wanted to keep in the dark. 9. Lost Command, 1966. Mark Robson's Lost Command opens with French paratroopers fleeing the fall of Dien Bien Phu, humiliated, bitter, and desperate for redemption. Anthony Quinn's Colonel Raspagee believes another war can wash away defeat, leading his men into the Algerian insurgency with a conviction that feels like obsession. Alain Delon's lieutenant sketches battle plans over café tables, while memories of Nazi occupation seep into every decision. The film draws a brutal parallel. The same methods once used against the French are now deployed by them in Algeria. Torture, ambushes, and street executions are presented without euphemism, and that honesty was enough to make executives blanch. Early reviews that praised its realism also dared to use the word torture unironically, something Columbia was quick to bury under a blanket of strategic silence. Its release was downplayed, slotted between lightweight romances and adventure pictures. The hope was that it would vanish quietly, its critique of colonialism ignored. Yet Lost Command carried an unshakable message that occupation corrupts the occupier as deeply as the occupied. Though forgotten by mainstream audiences, it became a whispered touchstone for those willing to confront the moral rot beneath military glory. Today, its relevance has only grown, its imagery echoing in conflicts where history seems determined to repeat itself. 10th Beach Red, 1967. Cornell Wilde's Beach Red doesn't march into battle. It crashes ashore. From the opening sequence, where Marines hit a Micronesian beach under a storm of mortar fire, the film rejects the straight-line heroics of its era. Instead, it fragments time, cutting between the carnage and quiet memories. An American corporal's Sunday afternoon with lemonade, a Japanese conscript's farewell beneath cherry blossoms. These flashbacks blur the lines between enemies, turning each soldier into a human being first, a uniform second. Visually, Wilde paints the war in startling images. Bayonet charges freeze-framed into crimson splashes, ocean water curling over spent cartridges, prayers whispered over the surf. The effect is haunting, almost poetic, yet relentless in its empathy for both sides. It was precisely that balance that unnerved studio executives. 20th Century Fox, fearing backlash from veterans organizations and the patriotic press, funneled marketing toward more conventional Pacific War stories. Beach Red received a token release before quietly vanishing from major screens. It wasn't outright banned, it was simply left to sink beneath the tide of safer narratives. But the film's impact rippled forward. In showing that war is a shared tragedy rather than a scoreboard, Beach Red anticipated the humanist war films of later decades. It challenged the belief that victory is measured in territory gained and made the radical argument that every casualty carries a personal story worth grieving. Its quiet disappearance was no accident. It was censorship by neglect, a calculated decision to let empathy wash away before it reached the public. 11. The 317th Platoon, 1965. Pierre Schoendorfer's The 317th Platoon is not a film about glory. It's about humidity, exhaustion, and survival, measured in hours. Set during the final French retreat from Indochina, it follows 19 soldiers as they attempt to reach an extraction point while the Viet Minh close in. Lieutenant Torrens recites academy tactics. Sergeant Wilsdorf counts bullets, rations, and leeches, knowing that discipline means little in the face of jungle decay. Filmed in the Laotian highlands with Schoendorfer's handheld camera, the movie feels documentary real. Rice paddies turn into ambush sites, river crossings dissolve into knife fights, and the chain of command frays under heat and fear. When the rescue finally comes, it's the officers who are evacuated first, a pointed jab at military hierarchy. French censors disliked its admission that the war's end was exhaustion, not triumph. American distributors, seeing uncomfortable parallels with Vietnam, passed on wide release. Instead, it became an underground legend among soldiers and war correspondents. Its cultural footprint is one of quiet influence, seen in later films where mud, rain, and attrition erode the facade of strategy. By refusing to mythologize a colonial war, the 317th Platoon offered a truth both sides preferred to bury, that the battlefield takes more than it ever gives back. 12. King and Country, 1964. Set in the sludge of World War I trenches, Joseph Losey's King and Country narrows its gaze to a single soldier's trial for desertion. Private Hamp, played by Tom Courtenay, is not a coward, but a man shattered by shell shock. His defense, led by Dirk Bogarde's Captain Hargreaves, becomes an argument not just for Hamp's life, but for the recognition of war's psychological toll. Lucy shoots in suffocating close-ups, the only sounds the distant thunder of artillery and the drip of trench water. There is no battle sequence, only the grinding machinery of a military court determined to make an example of one broken man. British censors hesitated over its indictment of military justice, but it was in the U.S. that the film effectively vanished. American distributors feared the comparison between Hamp's execution and the fate awaiting disillusioned conscripts in Southeast Asia. The result was a limited art house run and then obscurity. In cultural terms, King and Country stands as one of the earliest cinematic challenges to the idea that desertion is always dishonor. It asks whether loyalty to one's nation should come at the expense of loyalty to one's own humanity. The answer, whispered in mud and rain, was one that both governments and studios preferred not to hear. 13. The Battle of Naretva, 1969. Snow falls over the Balkans as Yugoslav partisans blow the Naretva bridge to halt a German advance, only to rebuild it under fire so thousands of wounded can escape. Director Veliko Bulajic stages the sequence with sweeping cranes, real tanks, and 10,000 extras. The result is a war epic that feels carved from ice and smoke, with Bernard Herrmann's thunderous score shaking the mountains themselves. On screen, Yul Brynner commands with granite authority, Franco Nero seethes as an impulsive engineer, and Orson Welles slips through as a political opportunist, counting casualties like wagers. Lovers embrace beneath collapsing trestles. Explosions turn night into a blinding orange noon. It's a portrait of resistance as both heroism and sacrifice, undaunted, bloody, and unapologetically anti-fascist. Hollywood initially co-financed an international cut, but recoiled when the final version made communist partisans unambiguous heroes. Dialogue was dubbed, Tito references erased, and scenes trimmed to soften its political edge. Still, Cold War exhibitors smelled ideology and gave it the cold shoulder. After a token run in a few cities, prints were shelved. Yet its cultural impact was too large to vanish entirely. Restorations decades later revealed a work as bold as any wartime saga, unashamed to take sides when moral compromise would have been easier. The film's suppression spoke volumes. Not all censorship comes from fear of violence. Sometimes it's fear of the politics behind the gun. The Battle of Naretva remains proof that a war film can be both an action spectacle and an unflinching statement, and that combination is precisely what made it dangerous to those who wished to control the narrative. These 13 films fought a second war, against silence. Though censored, trimmed, or quietly shelved, their defiance still echoes. They remind us that real courage isn't in the charge, it's in speaking the truth when the world prefers lies. Watch them, remember them, and keep their warnings alive for the battles yet to come.